Well, good afternoon. My name is Patrick Sieb. I'm Director of Economic Development and Placemaking for Destination Medical Center, Economic Development Agency here in Rochester, Minnesota. Destination Medical Center is a public-private economic development initiative supporting the transformative growth of Rochester and improving the economic climate of Minnesota. We are so pleased to have you join us for day 5 of a week-long webinar series. This webinar series, Road to Recovery, is focused on navigating the path to opening key sectors of the economy in this COVID-19 environment. Today's environment is about public spaces and events, and it is the finale to this week-long discussion where we've learned so much from this community. Our digital dialogue is about what communities can do to successfully reopen public spaces. Of course, public spaces have been open, but how to reinvigorate public spaces and what event planners can do to successfully host public events as shelter-in-place orders are relaxed. I'm joined by this incredible panel for a lively discussion that will be both inspiring and practical as we work together as a community to figure out how to create safe, healthy, and compelling customer experiences that will encourage the return to public spaces and events. Before I introduce our panel, I'm pleased to invite the Mayor of Rochester, Kim Norton, to make a few opening comments. Mayor Norton was elected in 2018, took office in 2019 after, I'll say, 10 years in the Minnesota State Legislature, and I could be off by a year or two, and 2 years studying with the Bush Fellowship, studying the importance of public space in community building. So Mayor Norton, so appreciative that you would carve time out of your day to participate and just make some opening comments. So Mayor, I'll give you the floor.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's an honor to be here. And I'm thrilled that Rochester has stepped to the forefront in helping businesses reopen. The Chamber of Commerce and DMC have both been incredibly busy putting together webinars, reaching out to our community to make sure that we do this right and do this well. And I'm very excited to see the large crowd that's joined this webinar today, Road to Recovery. I also am honored to be on this panel, and I'm just going to do the opening, and then I'm going to step off because I'm not the one with the knowledge. This great group of panelists is. I'm just bringing the welcome, and it's exciting to do so. I think it's really important that we work together as a community to develop protocols and practices to reopen, and we need to do so in ways that make people comfortable. One of the things that I think is really important is this idea of the public realm and how vital that is, particularly now as we're learning that being close together is dangerous for us during this time of COVID-19. But public spaces are really important to Minnesotans and to people in Rochester as well. So creating and recreating our public spaces so that everyone feels comfortable being there. We may need to make some changes, of course, as we move ahead, and I hope that's what you'll talk about today, so that we can still create something I learned about on a Nobel Peace Prize panel a couple of years ago, which was the idea of a cosmopolitan canopy, how to create places in our community where everyone feels welcomed and safe. And that is about public space and the importance of public space. So again, I'm really appreciative for the opportunity to be here. And I will be in listen mode now to these wonderful panelists to learn more about what I can do to support what's going to be a new and changing world post-pandemic. But Patrick, thank you for the opportunity, and I'll put myself in on mute and close my video down.
Mayor, before we lose you, I just want to acknowledge the incredible leadership that you have been providing. Both in leading the economic stability group that meets multiple times a week, and designing solutions, and the work you're doing with the nonprofit community. Your relationship with the governor has certainly been a value added, and also the connection you have with the Bloomberg Harvard cohort. And That has offered, I think, Rochester a special opportunity to connect with cities across the country who are all dealing with this. And this is one of the most unusual circumstances where there isn't a mayor in America who isn't faced with the very same issues that you're faced with, and to have the benefit and access to that intelligence, if you will, I think has been extraordinary. And thank you for the leadership that you've provided.
Thank you. I count myself lucky every day that I've had these opportunities given to me as a brand new mayor. Who would have thought we'd be where we are today? But all those opportunities, and I would say it's international mayors that I get to speak to as well. So what an advantage it's been, and it's been helpful to me. And I'm glad I've been able to help the community get through this tough time.
Well, with that, thank you. And to the panelists, you now understand the challenge that you've just been given by this mayor and, of course, mayors across Minnesota, which is how do we create environments that people feel safe and comfortable, that we create this experience that people are looking for. And I'm going to introduce our panel, and beginning with Mike Nigbur, Park and Forestry Director for the City of Rochester. I'm going in reverse order on the screen. Karli McElroy, Senior Director of Placemaking for Rochester Downtown Alliance. Jerry Hammer, General Manager of Minnesota State Fair. And Tom Fisher, University of Minnesota Design Center. As we launch into today's program, we'd like to know a little bit about you as an audience. And we have a brief poll that we're going to ask just to find out where you're from. So if you will respond to the poll that's going to populate on your screen in just a moment. And we just would like to know where you are coming from. Helps us understand a little bit how to shape this conversation. So let's take a look to see who our audience is geographically. So again, we have strong attendance from throughout Minnesota. So just for all of you to know that while Mike and Karli, you are focused on work here in Rochester, that it really crosses the interest of other parts of Minnesota. And of course, Tom and Jerry, you represent voices that are more statewide than necessarily local. So thank you very much for responding to that poll. And members of the audience, again, I want to remind you, or at least to let you know, that there is a question and answer box on this platform. And we would love for you to ask questions. We'll try to field them. But importantly, if you have ideas or suggestions, we'd love to see those as well. One of the things that I've been most impressed with from the governor and his team is this top-down, bottom-up approach. The governor and the leadership from the state are really providing guidance and direction based on the science and intelligence that they have access to, but they're also looking for solutions from communities, from individuals, from organizations. And so ideas that you might have, feel free to populate that question and answer screen, box with those ideas as well. And one of the things that we have learned during this week-long series is there are a number of themes emerging. And one thing that we have heard is that people have said, and I'm going to ask you this question, Tom, people have said that this pandemic disruption, this pandemic is a disruption that is in many ways accelerating changes that were already underway and were likely to happen. Accelerating changes already underway. Give me 3 examples that come to mind when I say that.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I mean, let's look at telecommuting, the idea of working at home. Before the pandemic, that was a relatively small part of the workforce that worked regularly from home. Now, most people are working from home at various levels. And so something that had just begun to happen is now become the dominant mode for many people to work because of the pandemic. In terms of the impact this will have, I mean, this will lead us to sort of reimagine what a home is. A home is also a place of working. It will also, I think, cause us to rethink how much do we need to go back to offices. I think the office will change and it will become more of a place for meetings, but less of a place to commute to 9 to 5. So think about the impact that will have on our whole transportation infrastructure, which has been designed around the idea of people commuting 9 to 5. We may find a much different commuting pattern, much more distributed across the day. And we may find, in fact, much less commuting going on, as many people are starting to say, well, this is actually working pretty well for me. So why spend money on office rent when I can equip my employees and they can continue to work from home? So that's one trend. Another trend is online shopping. Again, that has begun to take off before the pandemic, but now it's the dominant way in which people are getting goods and even services delivered to them through pickup and delivery. And that is going to change the nature of retail. It's going to make bricks and mortar retail have to focus more on the things that can't be delivered, more immersive experiences, while goods and services are increasingly going to be delivered to our doorstep. It's going to change the nature of our streets, where curb space is going to become more important than parking space because of the need to pick up and deliver goods. And so reimagining streets that are less about parked cars and more about allowing vehicles to have access to pick up and deliver from stores, I think is going to change the way we think about the street and the curb and the sidewalk. Another trend has been autonomous vehicles. Again, an emergent area. There aren't many of them around, and yet we've seen, for health reasons in this pandemic, a much greater use of autonomous vehicles to move medical equipment, to move sensitive materials back and forth. I think we're also seeing a concern about people being in transportation with other people. And so we're probably going to see more of a trend toward micro vehicles that might be transporting one person in an autonomous way. And so the car companies have all been working on this, and I think the pandemic is going to accelerate that. And then maybe finally is just parks. You know, the mayor talked about the importance of open spaces, and we're seeing the closing of streets to give people more space in parks, and I think an even greater use of parks. So we may find after the pandemic that we need more open space, more park space than what we've already had. So those are just a few thoughts.
I think that's a really great way to frame this discussion. And Mike, I'm going to turn to you and say, given these sort of macro changes that Tom is suggesting, home, remote working, offices will change, online shopping, autonomous vehicles, translate that for us, perhaps on some impacts it will have on public space and parks.
Sure, thank you, Patrick. I think to start with, I'd point back to things we saw originally here several years ago with our park system planning that we did locally here. And in that planning effort, we found people, love parks already. They wanted more changes. They wanted more desirable amenities in the parks. So I think that's a standard that we see changing right now. Now, fast forward to today, we now see even a greater perspective from people saying how important the parks are and the public open spaces are, whether it's your street areas or your trail corridors or the parks in your neighborhood. They're all finding a lot more value than what they had done before. And going back to the chart you see right in front of you, for example, is what's called Quarry Hill Park. And at the park, there's a giant nature center there, a big nature center. And that was closed about mid-February. And even though the darker lines there show an increase in March, April, and May, that's what the nature center closed. That brings in about 120,000 people per year. So the volume of people increase in the parks without the nature center being open is just dramatic. It shows that impact on our local area. In talking to colleagues across the state and my networking with other peers, we're hearing the same thing across those other professionals too, is that there's a bigger demand and a bigger impact on our park system. And I hear back from people also, they want the old part of life as well. They want to have festivals and events and activities and the fun things that happen in parks, but they also want that social isolation that also has to happen. And they're not quite sure how to get there. And that's kind of why we're, as professionals, working towards that end to help guide that process.
Well, I think that is a really great way to set up another piece that we've been hearing throughout this week of conversation, which is this idea that, and I'm going to look at my notes, this idea of what somebody in the hotel conversation on Wednesday talked about, the seamless experience, meaning, and I think it was actually discussed yesterday too with one of our retailers, like how do we create the sense of safety, the social isolation you talked about, Mike, but even beyond social isolation or distance rather, how do we create the sense of that it's a clean environment, that if I'm at a hotel or I'm at the airport or I'm using public transportation or I'm at a retail shop, that I am experience the same level of cleanliness and safety from that point of view. And Karli, Rochester Downtown Alliance pre-COVID has been looking at ways of tackling that. And I wonder if you could talk about that work that you've been doing and how that will contribute during this COVID environment to creating a sense that Rochester is safe regardless of what venue you're in.
Right. Thanks, Patrick. So, right before COVID, our organization was about 3 weeks away from launching a new Clean and Safe Ambassador program for downtown Rochester. This program would feature cleaning and safety ambassadors in the downtown that would regularly wipe down and sanitize surfaces, pressure wash sidewalks, serve as an extra set of eyes and ears for the police, connect people experiencing homelessness to needed services, check in with downtown businesses and provide them with information about what's going on in the downtown, and then also provide wayfinding and recommendations to residents and visitors. So obviously that launch was slightly delayed, but we're currently working with our vendor, our national vendor, Block by Block, who does all this work in other cities as well, like Minneapolis and New York and Chicago, to start implementing at least the cleaning and sanitizing services, as that, along with the communication to the public, will be very, very essential as we move into a COVID-19 recovery for downtown, and creating that perception that downtown, really above a lot of other places within the city, is being maintained, it's being cleaned, it's being cared for, and it's a safe place to be and to experience a lot of our public spaces and businesses.
One thing I'm noticing on this image on the screen is this gentleman wearing a branded T-shirt. I don't know which city this is in, but I think part of the strategy that you have in mind is this visibility of the Clean and Safe initiative, and that is also a message that came from one of our hotel operators who said, we do a lot of things that are invisible, that we don't give a lot of attention, that we don't make transparent. But now we need to be more transparent about how clean we are and what we're doing for cleanliness. And in a way, this sort of branding around the ambassador program is consistent with that notion of like sending clear signals that we are creating a safe environment.
Right. To that point, I completely agree. So I think, when you ask yourself, what does safety look like? I think safety for downtown Rochester is going to include lots of visible cleaning from our ambassador team, but then also, to your point, Patrick, it's the communication of that as well. So making sure that we're communicating out to the public on our channels, on social media, e-newsletter, all of that, to say, here's how downtown is being cared for. Here's what we're specifically doing, whether it's wiping down public fixtures, benches, doorknobs, everything like that downtown, so we can convey that this is a safe place to be, whether you're a resident or visitor or a patient at the Mayo Clinic as well.
Yeah. Just to remind the audience that we have the Q&A box open, and we'll welcome questions that will come in. And of course, one of the questions is about events, outdoor events and festivals, and specifically about down by the riverside. And without answering that question, and maybe Mike, that may be something you'll help respond to, but the standard bearer for our events in Minnesota is the Minnesota State Fair. And we are so pleased to have Jerry Hammer here, who has spent a lifetime at the state fair. I think since you were 15, I don't want to say how many years it's been, but you said since you were 15. So you have, and a leader of the Minnesota State Fair. And I think everybody wants to know, is it going to be a Minnesota State Fair this year? And what does it look like to get to that point?
Well, right now we don't know, and I'll say it's been 50 years since I've been at. Actually, it's my.
Got it.
There you go. We are continuing to prepare for the fair on the chance that we're able to have a fair this year, and we know where things are heading. Nobody's. We don't have any illusions about anything whatsoever, but we also know that as this continues to evolve, as the whole COVID thing continues to evolve, things are changing pretty much every day. Now, there's perhaps the best way to look at the fair is on the fair side. Those of us directly involved with production of the fair, we're the producers, but we don't bring all of the other elements to the fair. There's agriculturalists and contractors, entertainers, commercial exhibitors, competitive exhibitors. There's this huge network that's necessary, and everybody's got to be hitting on all 8 for that to happen. And what we're seeing in some of those areas, right now agriculture isn't doing so well. In fact, in a couple areas, the wheels are starting to fall off. So we're just seeing some things develop there. Our education building, those types of projects, all of that's all school driven, and school isn't in session. So that's changing. Entertainers are anxious to get out and perform, but they also know the reality as well. So that landscape in each of those many different areas continues to change day by day, and we're monitoring that. But we're not at a point yet where we have to absolutely declare one way or another. So we're continuing to plan on a fair. We're also, looking at an alternative situation, whatever that might be. Fair, no fair. We'll be ready for either, but for now, there's no compelling reason to make any announcement or to make a decision before we have to. And these kinds of decisions you really don't want to make until you absolutely need to. So in the meantime, we'll continue preparing. And all the comments so far about public space and people getting together and festivals, that's so important. Anthropologically speaking, we're all hardwired to share experiences, and there's nothing quite like the fair in terms of providing shared experience. When people are ready to come back out, when it's safe to come back out, we'll be ready to welcome people. So in the meantime, hey, look at that. Yeah. The reminder right there. Yeah. Well, and for us, we've been, since it started, since it really hit home, I think for everybody, it would have been mid-March.
Yeah.
And since then, we said, well, it's only March, and now, well, it's only April. Well, now it's only May 1st. But as the days go by and the weeks go by, the picture becomes more clear. We know more, we learn more. But ultimately, what it gets down to is people need to feel welcome. They need to feel safe. The fair is a great celebration. And if people don't feel like celebrating, then it's probably not a good idea to even attempt. But we will be in discussions, of course, with Minnesota Health Department. We're following all the guidelines right now, CDC requirements, all of it. But
so Jerry,
issues right now, so we've got to put ourselves on the back burner.
Yeah, and just to catch something you said and sort of parlay that over to Tom, I heard you say something that we heard from our hospitality industry, and the phrase they used is "We'll be ready when you are ready." And this is this idea that there is the CDC guidance, but then there is what the customers are after. And one of the things that Andrew Zimmer said yesterday to us, Andrew, of course, a chef and leader in the restaurant industry, said to us, what's going to happen is really the core values of what's most important is what's going to survive. And perhaps, Tom, I'm going to just ask you to perhaps tease out of what is it about the Minnesota State Fair or about festivals or events that really are the core values, and how can those core values survive, and what's the what's the sort of design of those that to create those experiences? Because ultimately, as we modify, what are some opportunities to do that?
Well, humans are social animals. We like getting together. I mean, the state fair is a great experience, but we like festivals. We want to be together. And I think that's part of the challenge of pandemics and plagues. At the same time, every plague leads to innovations in the public realm. I mean, past plagues from the Middle Ages led to the first sanitary sewers and the first street cleaning. The cholera outbreaks in the 19th century led to indoor plumbing and to zoning policies that gave people access to daylight and ultraviolet light, knowing that that could kill viruses. So I think that we should start thinking about what this pandemic will lead to in terms of innovations. For example, there is technology that has surface films that can kill viruses and bacteria upon contact. So might we start to look at coating surfaces that are frequently handled by large numbers of people with new kinds of technology? We have all the technology to automate opening of doors, the operation of a lot of things in buildings. I think we're going to start to see sensors automating a lot of things so we don't have to handle door handles. I think we're also going to see a change in apparel. I mean, we're seeing people wearing kerchiefs and scarves now to be ready to cover their face if they need to. So we're going to see a whole new way of dressing in the public that enables people to be safe. And we may even see in airports a whole new protocol of entering countries or entering from other places. For example, the automated taking of temperatures of people remotely may be part of a protocol of entering things, maybe even entering the state fair, so that we can identify people who may not be aware how ill they are. So I think we're going to see a lot of technology happen as has happened in the past when we've had plagues.
Yeah. Well, Mike, it makes me wonder of the things that Tom talked about. I know you're part of the team that city administration is leading to think about all of the municipal services and reopening of the library and beaches and golf courses and all of the conversations that have been going on in pursuit of the governor's direction. Have you been thinking about technologies, maybe ones that you've already used but want to expand, or any of these ideas around smart thermometers, or what's your reaction? How do you think people will respond to that?
I think we're still learning that. It's a changing environment right now. I think that when we start talking to our peers across the state and even locally here, how we do some festivals, they might become virtual. So virtual, and you've heard about some of these things, the virtual concerts or a virtual running event. These are happening right now in response to COVID and this pandemic issue. Will that continue? I don't know that answer. I do know that as part of the safety activities go, like Karli mentioned earlier on, how will we incorporate those safety measures into it? Is it thermometers? Is it the low technology, for example, the barriers, physical barriers and required separations to make these things happen? The crowd you see right now on the screen obviously will not be a common theme, at least probably for this summer, I would guess. You may still see a crowd be a little more spacious out in these larger parks that we may have in the communities. So I think that's where the things I'm seeing right now may happen. It's low tech from a parks perspective only, and where you can incorporate the event side of things for technology like the webinars or the other media like this, that'd be the opportunity that I see happening.
So speaking low tech, Karli, your organization represents really Main Street Rochester. And I know a lot of Main Streets are trying to figure out what does retail look like, what do restaurants look like. Low tech, I'm thinking from a personal point of view, when I go back to a restaurant, I'm going to want to know that there's ability to be socially distant, and we heard Andrew yesterday talk about the need that business models are going to change, that restaurants won't be able to have the same amount of capacity. What do you think, what opportunities are there going to be for more outdoor seating? outdoor venues, maybe centralized outdoor environments that people would bring their food to, not necessarily served by a particular restaurant.
Sure. I think that's a good thing to think about is, with the diminished capacity within businesses and just knowing that COVID could potentially spread a lot easier indoors. It's looking at some maybe outdoor options. I know in other cities, there's this idea of, do we have the option to close down some streets? And, do those streets, could you close down some streets around a city park, create more space within that park for people to spread out? I know our organization has thought about, do you allow maybe a restaurant to do some sort of a pop-up within that park, and then you mark out different socially distanced tables and chairs, and think about how you're looking at your current resources, your current spaces in a different way. So for Rochester, we have this really great riverfront area with kind of these larger open spaces nearby. Could we potentially use those in a way that we haven't before? Or whether it's Central Park, which we as an organization, we're going to make improvements to this year. Do we close down some parts of the street, allowing people to have more room? And then, like I said, put tables and chairs out that are socially distanced, just to provide those additional spaces for businesses.
Yeah. It makes me think about again, this notion of a seamless experience, that you can go into a restaurant, pick up your food, perhaps stay in the downtown rather than returning home, but doing it in an environment that is safe for you and your family, but still within, as Tom said, next to other people, because people want to be near other people. So that perhaps we are intentional. And maybe, Tom, you're doing work on, and if not, I'm going to encourage you to, around, what is a prototypical outdoor space that can welcome people, but still provide protection. What does that look like from, just imagine that for us, or describe it for us. And I didn't ask Tom this ahead of time, so I'm totally putting him on the spot, but.
That's okay. I mean, Karli mentioned Central Park. We may forget that New York Central Park, which was one of the first urban parks in America, was basically put in for health reasons because of the cholera epidemic. Parks were called the lungs of the city, so that if you were ill, you were encouraged to go to nature. And Frederick Law Olmsted, the first landscape architect, designed Central Park in New York to isolate people so that people did not congregate. And so there's relatively few places, large open spaces. There are a couple, like the Great Lawn, but a lot of it was designed to enable people to be outdoors, but apart from each other. And so I think that we're going to see innovations in park design. I've seen a new design for a park in Europe that is designed, it sort of uses hedges to keep people apart. And it's designed in a kind of the pattern of a fingerprint, so that you could walk into these hedgerows and enjoy nature without necessarily being any closer than a couple meters away from somebody. And so I think we'll see innovations in park design as a result of this, but parks themselves have always been viewed as the way to have healthy cities. And I think that will continue in the future.
Well, one of our panelists, Jamie Sunsbach from Collider, earlier this week, said he is going to organize a hackathon around rethinking the office space environment. He runs a co-working space, which is all about people gathering. That's why people come to co-working space. And he has an idea of indoor hedges, perhaps greenery that divides spaces. But perhaps we ought to have a hackathon, Mike and Tom and others, around what could be a prototypical experience of a gathering place that incorporates technology, incorporates physical distancing. So, maybe and I can imagine a couple of places, Karli, in downtown where we could do that type of prototypical demonstration. And if we could draw on the University of Minnesota expertise. Mike, are you in on this?
You bet, I'm in.
Jerry, people want to know, what's the drop dead date for deciding if the fair is a go, no go? Like, when do people have to order chicken wings? 10 truckloads of chicken wings or not? So what's the drop dead date for deciding on the fair being a go or a no go?
Well, that's the deal. There really isn't one, because everybody's date is different. You know, and we look again among all the different groups that are involved in producing the fair. For the corn roast guy, he's got to plant corn. You know, so his date is different than someone who, than a vendor maybe who's, you know, making handicrafts or product or something at home. For them, it might be a week before the fair. You know, it's different for everybody. For our part, from the administrative side of the fair, there's a lot of things we can do that don't involve ordering a lot of product and incurring a whole lot of expense with ordering supplies, that kind of thing. The thing is about a specific date is that if there was such a thing, it would continue to move. You know, as we learn more, as we hear more, as we see more what's going on in the world, that date would move around. But it's the date is significantly farther out than it would have been the last time there was no fair, which was 1946, due to a polio epidemic. Mm-hmm. It's very complex on a whole lot of levels, and it's different for everybody. For our part, you know, again, I can't pick exactly a day, but it would be sometime late spring, early summer.
So, but I think this is an opportunity, don't you think, Jerry, to have a virtual state fair and to see what that would be like? I mean, I think the milk run, for example, you talked about virtual races. Why not have a virtual milk run? And why not think about the delivery of Martha's cookies to Sweet Martha's cookies in a new kind of delivery mechanism or mode, or have us all virtually sort of log on to seeing the best cows and the best pigs. In other words, it could be a real opportunity to utilize digital technology to think about our coming together in new ways.
Right, and Tom, and we're doing exactly that internally, and then also, you know, the beauty of being involved with fairs is you wind up with friends all over the country doing exactly the same thing. You know, I'm doing weekly conversations with the fair managers at the big Midwestern fairs, and a lot of precisely that kind of discussion is happening right now.
You have said you don't want to do a sorta fair. I think you said. Right. I think that would be the Minnesota Great Get Together. You don't want to do the Minnesota Great Get Together. So it's an all in or canceling, I think, is what I'm hearing in that.
Yeah, well, as far as a live event is concerned, yeah, exactly. You know, the things we talk about with Tom, virtual things, yeah, there are components of the fair that you can present in new ways, but just overall, to really experience the fair, and again, it's a grand celebration. It's difficult to imagine doing a presentation in the state fair environment where there's social distancing. And Tom, you brought up Sweet Martha's. We know what that looks like. It's kind of tough to determine exactly how that would happen, but it all gets back to, and it was mentioned earlier, that it's that the science can all say it's okay, and it just logistically everything can all line up, but it's going to ultimately be up to the people who will attend. Are they ready to come and celebrate? Are they ready to get back out and return to what normal is? In some senses, of course, you know, there is a new normal, but in other senses, a lot of what we're doing now is temporary. Changes in some areas are going to be accelerated, of course, but throughout history, every time there's been a plague and a disease and an outbreak and anything, we've always come back to these shared experiences, whether it's athletic events, you know, stadiums, coliseums, whatever. What'll it take to get back to that point? You know, we're not 100% sure, but for the fair to be what the fair is, we can't do a sort of fair. And some of the discussions I've had with other fairs have been along those lines: limiting hours, limiting attendance, doing all that kind of thing, giving masks out when you arrive. But the truth is, if health is if health is a concern to the level where you need to go to those ends to go to this celebration, then you probably shouldn't be going to a celebration.
Right, right. Well, I got a message from one of my colleagues that that was a terrible pun on my part, but I will just say it's the best pun thus far on this webinar. So it's apparently a very low bar. If anybody has a better pun, you should try for it. Karli, outdoor spaces in Minnesota, how do we make those work?
So I assume that you're talking about winter. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, like, what experiences can you draw from Nordic countries and other northern countries that really activate their outdoor seating and cafes and restaurants throughout the year?
Right. Well, I think it's we've proven from events that we've done, especially this past year. We were able to sneak in Socialized, which is basically a winter-themed event that features up to 7 uniquely themed ice bars. We have a live DJ. We had curling in the alley, family-friendly activities. And with that event, over the course of 3 days, we saw about 67,500 attendees. So it's looking at, hey, people are cooped up in their houses in the winter, and they obviously do want options to come outside. And I think we've proven that we're pretty hardy in Minnesota. So, is it looking at if you want to have some sort of a sidewalk cafe seating? We've seen in other cities where they've, even had like heated igloos. Maybe you can reserve those with blankets, and that, after the use, they're sanitized, they're wiped down, and it's a way for people to kind of get out and enjoy the outdoors in a way that's safe, or even just having cafe seating that's outside with fire pits or heat lamps and blankets, and having hot beverages there. Even when we did that at Socialized with our fire pit area, it was very, very well attended, and people seem to really enjoy it as well. So I think we got to give ourselves a little bit of credit in Minnesota.
Right. Well, you're really talking about this sort of blurring between public space and private space, that this idea that, and especially today when the indoor spaces are going to be probably so constrained in terms of their capacity. And one of the, I think one of the big disappointments that families are facing this year is the inability to have high school graduations and college graduations and weddings. And I wonder, Mike, and I know public spaces have been used for some of those functions in the past, but I wonder if you've thought about a role that public spaces can play in the future in enabling more of those semi-private events in an outdoor venue that is more available during this environment.
Yeah, in fact, we have. Again, we don't have the answer right now specifically because we don't know how long this is going to entail. But our park shelters and our park venue spaces we currently are utilizing for a lot of those activities anyways, historically. But we've been planning on, as part of our overall park improvements long term, that these other additional spaces, like more shelters or more alcove areas that you can gather in either small groups or larger groups, as graduations or small graduations or as picnics like this, that you can have out in these spaces, and while still being separated from other park activities that may be going on. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the key, is that you want to have these spaces special for yourself. So if you throw everything together in one bigger park and expect it to be a nice, quiet, enjoyable space, it may not be that way. So mm-hmm. having these pocket areas elsewhere around would be very beneficial.
Yeah, and I think this idea that the new normal could in fact be better than the old normal in some ways. And so what I'm going to do now, is we're rapidly getting to the end of the time together, I'm going to ask if each of you would comment on or make an observation on what you think might be a silver lining that's coming out of this. When we asked the construction teams, the same question. And I'm just going to give you, so I'm giving you a clue of an example, but one of the construction companies said that here I am sitting with people who are normally my competitors, and we have learned to collaborate around this one enemy, and we are working together in a way that we have probably not worked together in the past. And so for him, that was a silver lining. And I'm wondering for each of you, if there's one or two silver linings that you see coming out of this disruption. And I'll start with you, Mike, and put you on the spot first.
Well, that's great because it's on top of mind. I find the biggest silver lining we have is people are finding a greater appreciation for our parks and trails and getting kind of back to nature to some respects. And I think that will continue longer term because people have been cooped up for so long here. Well, it's been a short time, but for so long in their own minds that they see these big open spaces, they want to get out there and utilize them. I think that will carry forward and get off their screens for a while. That will carry forward, like I said.
Jerry, what's a silver lining from the Minnesota State Fair point of view?
Got to unmute. Tom brought up a great point about things that are getting accelerated or will be, and the fair world has been like the last bastion of literally cash in a lot of ways, and people are, I think, rapidly moving towards touch-free pay, and technology is allowing us to do that. So that I could see that coming also, and happening much quicker, which is great. Also, surfaces that kill bacteria, viruses, that kind of thing. That too, I can see happening in a big way. And Karli had some excellent examples of things that I think would apply to the fair in pretty short order, actually. There's always innovation to come from these situations, and I'm really excited to see where it can all go and how it'll apply in the fair world.
Karli, what's a silver lining?
I think there are two that kind of come to mind for me. So, I think we'll come out of this with a lot better processes and procedures for how to clean our public spaces. We're learning a lot from our vendor that's up in the Twin Cities block by block for the ambassador program. Just of how do you clean and maintain different spaces so that we can ensure that their public safety is being met. And then also just related to events, we've had to see a lot of businesses switch to e-commerce and going online. And while it's been an extremely difficult process, I think for some, in the long run, I think it will be better for their businesses because it will put their products in front of people, and they'll just be able to, I think, be able to reach more people in a virtual world as well as a physical one. So I think that definitely comes across as a silver lining for me.
So I heard a greater appreciation for parks and nature and public space. I heard innovation and an opportunity to apply those innovations into the state fair and others. And I heard the new standard for cleanliness, which was always important, but now it's becoming even more important. And the fact that it's will help some businesses, in fact, reach greater audiences and actually expand their market share. Tom, I'm going to come back to you. I started with you. Silver lining or two based on what you're seeing and conversations you're having around the country.
Well, I think of Rob Emanuel's point about never letting a crisis go to waste. I think that is really true here. I actually think that pandemics and plagues have always allowed communities to experience a different way of living, right? And so think about how we're all living. I mean, there are obviously a lot of people who are struggling, a lot of people have lost their jobs, but think about what our daily lives have become now, right? We actually have time to go play with our kids more, right? In between meetings, I take my dog for a walk. I never could do that in my workday. And I'm beginning to think that this is actually a pretty good life. And so I think that the way we think about living and working needs to change. Digital technology really allows us to slow down, to relax, to integrate other kinds of things into our work life. I also think health is a huge issue. There was a recent study by Stanford University that showed that the reduced air pollution in Chinese cities has saved 20 times more lives than the number of people killed by the coronavirus, right? And so we are seeing much cleaner air, much healthier environments, reduced traffic accidents. The list goes on. And so it causes us, I think, to say, why are we going to go back to killing ourselves with air pollution and in auto accidents and in heart attacks because of the high stress environments that we've been living in? Is this an opportunity to sort of reimagine what a good life is? And then thirdly, I think for me, a silver lining is just the community building that this has created. People are out walking on the streets in ways that I hadn't seen before. Everybody needs to get out. And so we're finding in my neighborhood here that people are having socially distant conversations all the time now. And so I know it's hard to say this in the middle of a pandemic, but I think there's a huge silver lining in this, and that we would be foolish to go back to the way it was.
Well, I think that's a great set of words of wisdom and optimism and inspiration that I think is really important to leave this session with. And we would like to ask our audience, and the audience has been great. We've had lots of questions. We have not been able to field all of them, but we did put Jerry on the spot, so we got that done. And I think we heard some really great ideas and some ideas that emerged from the questions. But I would ask the audience for one more thing, which is to respond to a quick survey we have that will help us as we continue to shape and do more of these discussions, and just take a moment to do that. And while people are responding to these two simple questions, I want to say thank you to all of the panelists. Mike Nigbur from the City of Rochester, Karli McElroy from Rochester Downtown Alliance, Jerry Hammer from the Minnesota State Fair, and of course Tom Fisher from the University of Minnesota. Appreciate Mayor Norton for joining us throughout the program. And Mayor, you're on mute, but I'm going to give you the floor because I'd like you to feel free to make final comments. We appreciated your welcoming comments, and take yourself off mute and help us bring this home.
Well, it was a wonderful discussion. We need to have more of these moving ahead. The world is changing, and as my teacher, Tom Fisher, taught us, that there's positive things that can come out of this as well. And I do think our public spaces and the use of them, our parks, our downtown area are going to be some of the winners of that. So I encourage everybody on this webinar to do what they can in their own communities. If you're not from Rochester, and if you're not, you better get down here and visit. Right. As soon as things open back up. But thank you all. This has been a worthy time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, Mike, Karli, Jerry, Tom. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good job. It's a great program.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick, very much.
Nice
Very fast.
Yeah, it went by really fast.
Yeah, how long was that?
It went by very fast. Very fast. Thank you, team behind the scenes. Thank you very much for
great job.
Nice job overall, everybody.
That was great.
Very smooth.
Thanks,
Patrick, will the recordings be made available?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm supposed to say this every time and I forget. It's on our webpage, dmc.mn. We have recorded these and have the whole series. I'm going to be in big trouble with Bill.
I'd be curious to know what the results of the survey were, if you get a chance to share that.
We will happily share those.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.